Right. So this is about the cosmological argument, which is a very popular argument for the existence of God. In my opinion, it's one of the best. So, if you are someone that's interested in natural theology, interested about discovering if there is a religion that's true, or if it's atheism that's true or something, I think you should take a look at this argument because it's very good. And you can see that people that believe in gods and religion are not really irrational, but have actually very good arguments to support it. So the cosmological argument is about the existence of the universe, and basically, uh, first one must define what one means by the universe. And by the universe, I mean the universe is all physical reality. So it's not just what you can observe. If you say that there is a multiverse, what I'm calling the universe is actually everything that's physical reality. So the multiverse would be a universe in this sense. There is only one universe because it's everything. So it's important to see what physics can and what physics can't do. So what is physics? Physics is natural science that involves the study of matter and its motion through space and time, along with related concepts such as energy and force. More broadly, it's a general analysis of nature conducted in order to understand how the universe behaves. So, and how can you how do you know, um, how do you get to a law of physics? So, you know it by inductive methods on the behavior of nature. So you analyze how nature behaves, and by an inductive argument, you suppose that it's going to behave like that every time. So, for example, Newton saw the apple was falling, and that he saw this process many times. And by an inductive process, you suppose that if you let an object fall, if you drop an object, it falls, and then you can study gravity and that stuff, and by approximations and mathematical methods you can get the so-called laws. But it's all an inductive process. It's never deductive. Now, physics and the origin of the universe. This is very crucial because sometimes people say maybe physics can explain why the universe exists. Well, physics only can describe the universe, but it cannot explain why the universe exists. Remember, physics by definition is the description of the physical system, and I define the universe as all physical reality. So physics can possibly describe a state of affairs in which there is no universe, right? Because there would be no physical reality for physics to describe. There is no physics of non-being. When people like Lawrence Krauss and those people tell you that they can explain why the universe exists by physics, that's not really true, because what they call nothing is not really nothing, as like non-being. But notice that this is not about the Kalam argument, which has to do with the beginning of the universe. This just has to do with asking the question, why is the universe there? Why does the universe exist? Why the universe exists rather than nothing? So necessary versus contingent is a very important distinction. So a necessary existent being is a being that exists in every possible world. What I mean by that is that in every way reality could have been, that being is going to exist there. If you want an example, many people believe that numbers exist in this way. So if, for example, the number 1 exists as an abstract object, it exists in every possible world. There's no way that the number 1 can fail to exist. If it exists, we don't really know. Some people say that numbers exist, others say that don't, but there's an example of something that can exist necessarily. Now, what about a being that's contingent? Well, it just means that it's not necessarily existence, so it does not exist in at least one possible world. So, for example, I believe that I'm contingent because it's logically possible that I didn't exist. Now, what Leibniz's principle, weak form, because I just called it weak form because sometimes the principle of sufficient reason by Leibniz is like Leibniz's principle is associated with the principle of sufficient reason in its stronger form, which is rejected by philosophers. but the weak form is not but we can accept the weak form because it's not it's very plausible in my opinion. Weak form just says that everything that exists has an explanation for its existence, either in the necessity of its own nature or an external cause. Right. So if something exists, then either just by the definition of that something, you can explain why it exists. For example, as a number, you can say that if a number exists, then it must exist necessarily. And then, or in an external cause, like most things that you know that exist in this way. They have external causes. For example, your house has the external cause of the people that constructed and the materials that they use, etc. And we can convert this by to say that stating like every contingent being as an explanation for its existence on an external cause, because to say that it has an explanation for its existence is the necessity of its own nature. It's just another way of saying that it exists necessarily. So uh, so if you accept that, I think you should believe in God. Now let's see. And why should we accept this? Now, if you have something that exists but could have not existed, then it's plausible to ask the question, why is it the case that it exists while it may not have existed? And that's what Leibniz asks. So if you think that that question can be answered, then I think you should believe in God. Let's see. So because uh, if you say that the question has no answer, then just imagine that you find an object in the street and I ask you, why is that object there? And you just answer me, well, it exists necessarily. Of course, it exists without explanation. Now, that answer would be tremendously unsatisfactory, and I think no one would take it. Now, just by increasing the size of the object to be all the universe and all physical reality, it still needs an explanation of why it exists. And even if you say that it has existed for eternity, it doesn't undermine the fact that you still have to ask the question, why is it that it exists instead of just nothing, or instead of another universe or something like that, or instead of no universe and just some immaterial substance or something. So now the argument. So the argument goes like this. First premise. This is Leibniz's weak form of the principle of the weak form of Leibniz's principle of sufficient reason. Everything contingent. Oh, there is a mistake there. It should be everything that is contingent, but never mind. Every contingent being that exists as an explanation for its existence in an external cause. Now, the universe is contingent. Now, why should you believe that the universe is contingent? Well, if you think that it's necessarily true that the universe exists, uh, then I mean, then you must believe that logic itself entails the existence of the universe, which means it's logically impossible that the universe does not exist. And I think that seems very, very absurd, and actually almost no philosopher will believe in that. Most philosophers that reject this argument reject premise 1, not premise 2. So obviously the universe is contingent. There is a possible world that you can conceive in which there is no universe. That doesn't seem to be any contradiction with that. And actually you can prove that the universe began to exist, which is a very, very strong, I wouldn't, maybe it's really a knockdown proof to say that it's contingent, because if something is necessarily existent, then it must certainly not have at a beginning. It must exist in all states of affairs. It must be eternal and etc. Now the universe exists. Now this premise is just a fact, right? So now the conclusion, therefore the universe has an explanation for its existence in an external cause. Now we got to an external cause of the universe. We didn't get to God yet, but now think about it. What possibly can be an external cause for the universe? Now, first, it must be timeless, because the universe is all physical reality, all space-time reality. So if it's an external cause for the universe, it must not depend on any property of anything that the universe sustains in existence. So since the universe sustains time in existence, the cause must be timeless. it must also be spaceless because it created space, or it caused space. It must be immaterial because if it was material, it would depend on space to exist. And it must be an agent. Now, why must it be an agent? Well, if the explanation of the universe was just a set of necessary and sufficient conditions for the universe, then the universe itself would be necessarily existent, right? Because it would exist in every possible world in which the explanation exists. And the explanation, it's not necessary that the explanation is necessary, but if you say that the explanation is contingent, then you must ask the question, what explains the explanation? And if you go asking that forever, then you get an infinite number of explanations. And Occam's razor tells you don't postulate entities beyond necessity, so just say that the explanation is necessarily existent. And then you would have a necessarily existent set of sufficient and necessary conditions that for the universe. So the universe itself would be necessarily existent. And we just suppose that we just talked about it and we got to the conclusion that it's contingent. So the only way you can get around this is to say that the explanation of the universe is an agent that can cause the universe to exist or not cause the universe to exist. So the question is, why is there something rather than nothing? Because the agent that caused the universe decided to create it. That's going to be the answer. So the argument, so the final argument is like this. Oh, by the way, if you look at this set of characteristics, this is basically what many monotheistic religions call God: timeless, spaceless, immaterial, and an agent. And you can also add the property that it must be extremely powerful and intelligent because it caused the universe into existence, and the universe is extremely complex. So the final argument looks like this. First, if the universe has an explanation, that explanation is God. Well, this premise, if I showed it to you in the beginning of the presentation, you would say this guy is crazy. Where did he get that from? But if you analyze all the other parts, you see that we arrive to the conclusion that the universe must have an explanation and it must have all these properties. And I think it's very reasonable to call a being with all these properties God. So if the universe has an explanation, the explanation is God. Now, the universe has an explanation. This follows from Leibniz's weak principle of sufficient reason. So if God is an explanation for the universe, God exists, right? So I just added this one to make it valid, because obviously if I say that God explains the universe, then God must exist, otherwise that wouldn't make any sense. So therefore God exists because he has an explanation for the universe. So it can only be an explanation if he exists, right? So that's it. That's the cosmological argument for the existence of God. And now, just to, like, in a couple of minutes, tell you about some objections. Many people go against premise 1. They say that would be the problem here, because not many people say that contest that the universe is contingent. That's like obvious. So premise 1 is the big one. But what I really want to tell you is this: if we just proved, if you accept all the premises except premise 1, and if you accept all the reasoning except premise 1, then if you want to reject the conclusion, you must reject premise 1. So I just converted the question, does God exist, to the question, is it true that every contingent being that exists has an explanation for its existence in an external cause? And most people would say that this is true, but many of those people wouldn't say that God exists because they are inconsistent in their logic. So when you think that it's really irrational to believe in God, ask yourself the question if this premise is really irrational, because you must believe that it's as irrational as believing in God. So if you think that this premise is plausible, then you should believe that it's plausible that God exists. And I think this premise is very plausible, because it's a great it's also science is based on this. Science also always asks the question, why is it true that such and such happens if it was possible that it didn't? So if you reject this premise, and if you start to think that some contingent beings may exist without explanation, you also have to review your philosophy of science and get in great trouble. I hope this helped to show that it's very rational to believe that God exists. God bless.